Hey guys, another video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist and our mini-series on being married to a Japanese person. With all our how-to videos, we like to start by just clarifying again that these are generalizations and not always the case. These are observations, what we've actually observed for ourselves, or what people, Japanese people or other foreign people or other people that we know in Japan have experienced and told us about. So they're purely observations, they're generalizations, not always true. There are exceptions to it, of course, because not everybody is the same, but generally they are true. So if you come to Japan or if you do these things that we're talking about, then likely this will be your experience. And you can see, particularly these married to Japanese people videos, if you look through the comment section, most of the people who have been married to Japanese people for a period of time have said they recognize these things themselves. So it's very, very common, very, very generally true. So having said that, today's topic is being married to a Japanese person outside Japan. So maybe you meet a Japanese person outside Japan and get married, or maybe you get married in Japan and then go and live in another country. We've sort of mentioned on previous videos on this topic that it probably doesn't matter terribly much where you live. And just to clarify that, or as an example of that, have a look at the comments on the how-to videos from people all around the world who say, I don't care, I'm not Japanese, I couldn't live like that. And the more difficult the topic, or more difficult the thing, the more people say that. So recently, for example, we made a video in this mini-series, this married to a Japanese person, talking about cheating, and about how cheating isn't sort of talked about here. You don't sort of talk about it, you just don't talk about it. And a lot of people responded on that video and said, oh, I couldn't handle that, I wouldn't be handling that, I couldn't handle that. Now, if we just reverse that for a second, there are lots of things that we've made videos about that people have said, no, I couldn't handle that, I'm not Japanese, I wouldn't put up with that. Now, reverse it, and you have the way a lot of Japanese people feel when they're living outside Japan. Same thing. So, if a Japanese person gets married to a foreigner and goes and lives in Germany, or goes and lives in Australia, or goes and lives in America, or goes and lives in England, or France, or some other country, and then the partner's telling them, this is what we do here, there will be, of course, things where the Japanese person goes, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. Because the essence of what makes us ourselves doesn't change, does it? So there's some things, of course, you can say, okay, in this country you take your shoes off before you go in the house. Okay, I can do that. You know, there's a lot of cultural things like that that are easy. You know, you can adjust to them really easily. Okay, in Japan we shouldn't blow our nose in public, you know. Whereas a Japanese person has to adjust to the reverse if they live in another country. People are going to walk into their house wearing shoes, possibly, or people are going to be blowing their nose in front of them, possibly, things like that. And of course, cultural things like that people can adjust to often. But there are certain aspects that are more difficult to adjust to, aren't there? As we can see on the how-to videos. Some people say, yeah, I could do that. And there's other videos where lots of people say, no, there's no way I can live with that. So same for the Japanese people. And we get that here, because if we tell the Japanese people, hey, in Australia we do this, or in America people do this, or in England people do this, or in Germany people do this, quite often Japanese people go, I couldn't handle that, you know, you know. So of course, you know, of course it's only human nature. The other thing is that all those little things that you think, and this is the thing on the how-to playlist too, people often say, oh, I could handle that. You know, that's not a big deal, take your shoes off, that's not a big deal doing that, that's not a big deal doing that, that's not a big deal doing that. However, these things that seem really small, when you put them all together, cumulatively, can be really hard, because it's day in, day out, having to do things a different way. And of course, there's another point here as well. A lot of us come from cultures that are multicultural, or that you can just do whatever you want. You know, a lot of us have come from cultures where doing things your own way is perfectly normal and healthy, and nobody has a problem with it. Whereas, keep in mind, Japanese people come from a more homogenous culture where a lot of things here everybody does, or most people do the same way, and then if you do things differently from the way everybody else does them here, there does tend to be a bit of pressure on you from society. If nothing else, people will be tilting their heads and sucking through their teeth and going, you didn't use a straw, and we've given you millions of examples of that before. You know, no one's going to beat you about the head for doing things your own way in Japan, but they definitely will look at you and tilt their heads and go, you know, and that constantly eats away. And so what usually happens is most people who tell you that they're moving to Japan or they're going to be living in Japan, most foreigners that come to Japan go home. So, you know, they last 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, and then they go home. And you know, that's a statistic. There's statistics on this, how long people last. And we know ourselves, you know, people that tell us they're going to live here forever, and then a couple of years later, oh, I've decided we're going back to my country, because, you know, you've given up a lot. Now we'll switch this back. This is exactly the same situation for the Japanese people. So now let's look at the Japanese people. So if you marry a Japanese person and take them to your country, and this is a trap too, a lot of people know that or maybe they'll live with their Japanese partner in Japan for a while, and it's really tough for them and they really struggle, and they think, okay, well, I'll take him or I'll take her, I'll take my Japanese partner back to my country, and in my country I'm normal. In Japan I'm strange, and trying to get my partner to understand me is difficult. But when we're in my country it'll be easier, because they'll be able to see that everybody's like that, right? Which is sort of ironic, really, saying that I can't, you know, it's difficult for me in their country, so I'll take them back to my country. So when you take your Japanese partner back to your country to live, now I've got experience of this when I lived in Australia, because before I came to Japan I had a lot of Japanese friends, I had Japanese girlfriends, and I had friends who had Japanese girlfriends and friends who had Japanese wives. So I have experienced it outside Japan. Also, I have friends who live outside Japan, but also it's interesting when you're a foreigner living in Japan with a Japanese partner, everyone tells you their story. So any foreigners you meet who happen to have a Japanese partner will tell you all about it, you know, because you'll tend to go, yeah, it's like that, and you'll share your stories with each other. But the other interesting thing is Japanese people will tell you, oh, my friend Yukiko, she had an American husband, and you know, they lived in Osaka, and then they went and lived in America, and now she lives in Nagoya. And you say, where's the husband? Oh, he went back to America. That's over, right? And sadly, that's usually how it ends. And we hear this from our friends outside Japan too. We have friends in Spain, we have friends in Australia, friends in America, and we hear this all the time, these sad stories, you know. Oh, John down the road married a Japanese girl, and he went and lived in Japan for a while, and he's come back recently. You know, did he bring the Japanese lady with him? No. You know, and it's just because it's huge when you've got to give up, and we've mentioned this in previous videos, when you've got to give up your country to go live in another country, just that on its own is huge. Even the single people that come and live in Japan or that go and live in other countries often don't last, and it's because you're giving up your culture, you're giving up your country and your culture, unless you're really, really rich and you can spend a few months a year in each country or something. You're giving up your culture, you're giving up your country, you're giving up your family, you're giving up your childhood friends, you're giving all that. You know, occasionally if you're lucky and your friends have a bit of money, they might come visit you in the new country that you're living in, but usually they won't. And that's it, you've given that all up, and now you're living in another country where you're sort of viewed as an alien and as an oddity and as something a bit different. You know, and it rarely lasts. There's very few foreigners that live in Japan forever, percentage-wise, percentage to how many come here. There's always people saying, you know, I lived in Japan once, or I was in Japan once, or whatever, you know. But the percentage of people, you can find the statistics on this, and it's the same for Japanese people. And we know Japanese people as well who've lived in other countries, and you know, for a year or 2 years or 5 years, you know. And so we know people ourselves who've done it, but we also hear stories all the time, tragic stories. My cousin Yoshi, you know, or my cousin Yukio, she married a French guy, and she went and lived in France, but now she's back with the 2 kids, you know, and he stayed in France. And you hear about long-term, what do they call them? Long-distance relationships as well. You know, what's that? Where one partner's living in Japan and the other partner's living in their home country. Well, you know, right. You know, yeah, okay. So You know, that's usually the way it goes. So of course there are exceptions. We do know one lady who was pretty exceptional. She was actually a teacher of English in Japan, and she progressed and went to university and did all sorts of degrees in linguistics and things, and then she got offered a professorship in another country, and she went and lived there, and she's been in other countries she hasn't been in Japan full time for 15 years or something, and she probably won't come back. The Western culture sort of clicked with her, and she's comfortable with it. She's staying out there, not married, by the way, but it just happens to be that's she's clicked with the Western culture and she's staying there. But all the other Japanese people we know have all come back, and usually they'll tell you, and because we live in Japan, so they'll be honest with us about this particular thing. Is it great to be back? And they go, yeah, it's great to be back. And because we can understand that too, because we live in Japan, and to be honest, it doesn't matter how good another country is. If you're really comfortable with the Japanese way of living, going to another country for a period of time can be difficult, because there's good things about it as well. But Japan's just, for some people, it depends on what culture you click with. But for some of us who click with this culture, living in another culture after this would be difficult. So the bottom line is that the other thing, there's another point too, that inside your home, your feelings are going to be the same. You know, in the same way that if you're a foreigner living in Japan and you think, okay, well, in my apartment, I can do things my own way and that sort of thing. But when you get inside your apartment, your Japanese partner still feels the same. They're still Japanese, and most of them still have the same feelings about the important points. And you'll be the same, if they go and live in your country, and basically most of the things that we've talked about that people come up against, you'll experience no matter where you live. And this is what we hear. The stories are often the same, and the results are often the same, irrelevant to where people have lived. So the stories we get from our friends about, Yoshiko and her husband living in Osaka is the same as the story we get from, Natsumi and her husband living in France. It's the same story with the same outcome, usually. It's not wanting to sound pessimistic or anything, but this is just purely observational. This is what the stories sound like. It's almost like it's coming. When people start to tell you, you'll get someone, oh, you're from Australia. Oh, I had a friend who married an Australian, and as soon as they say it, you go, oh, here we go. And you sort of know where it's going to go, because most of the time it does. She lived in Australia for 5 years in Sydney. And because they tend not to want to get too personal, so they tend not to jump to the sort of the personal stuff too quickly. But if you ask them and say, oh, where does she live now? Oh, she's back in Nagoya. Okay. Is her husband there? Oh no, he stayed in Sydney. And that's usually the case. Oh, I had a friend who married a foreigner. She married a French guy. She lived in France for 4 years. Now she's living back at her parents' place with her 2 kids. It's usually the case. I mean, we do know some that are still together. We know an Australian guy that's living in Australia with his Japanese wife and 2 kids. Last we heard, they're still together. Of course, there's examples of it working. Of course, we've got an example of it working. It's been really, really hard work, but we've got a relationship that works. A family, a mixed family, Australian and Japanese family. And it's working, but it's hard work. But the point is, if you look at the numbers, you look at the percentages, and the chances of having a relationship that's going to work, no matter whether you're in Japan or outside Japan, is pretty remote. And it's just a statistic. If you look at the statistics, this is all anecdotal, what we're telling you. But I mean, the point is, when you hear these stories all the time, it's very rarely, I can't remember the last time someone's told us one of those stories and it was a happy ending. It's very rare, really rare. Oh, my friend married a foreigner and she's happily married to him over in Europe somewhere. You do hear it, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare, because for all the reasons that we just talked about, even all the reasons we've just talked about, it's a hell of a lot of pressure there. You know, to get past, you know, there's sort of those two areas that are the main areas. And one is giving up your country and your culture and your family and your childhood friends. That's huge to a lot of people. That's really huge to a lot of people. And you know, again, unless you're really rich and can afford to go back regularly for long periods of time, that's a real toughie. And then you've got all these other things that are, you know, relationship differences to how people like to have their relationships. So yeah, to that person who triggered this video, someone sent a message and said, you know, can you talk more about that, you know, living in other countries? What about if you're living in other countries, you know? And to that person, well, you know, yeah, short story is that it probably doesn't make a lot of difference, really. I mean, it's sort of, you can sort of give examples a little bit better. One positive thing about it, even if you just visit your own country, if you take your partner back to your own country for a visit, at least there's one thing that comes from that, is that they can see that your strange things that you do are not just you. That's interesting when they go back to your country with you and they see that all the other people are doing that strange thing that you do. You know, all the other people hug and kiss when they meet each other, maybe depending on your home country. And you know, all the other people hold hands with their partners, or cuddle their partners, or kiss their partners in public, or you know, compliment their partners, or you know, the things like that they can notice, but it doesn't really make much difference. It's the same. It's sort of it's only intellectual on an intellectual level. That's sort of interesting. They go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. But see, it doesn't really make much difference. It's the same as when we're foreigners in Japan. Just because everybody, you know, or most people, just because 99% of people here never talk about cheating with their partners, you know, if they suspect their partner's cheating, they don't talk about it. Just because 99% of people agree that that's the best policy, you know. And just to touch on that too, some people really reacted to that, you know, that's terrible, you know, not asking about cheating and that sort of thing. Just something didn't get mentioned in that other video. If you know somebody is cheating, you know, in some countries, if you know that your friend's partner is cheating on them, you would tell your friend, wouldn't you? If you found out that one of your friend's partners was cheating, if you saw your friend's partner somewhere with someone else, and you know, in a compromising sort of situation, and you knew they were cheating, or you're positive they were cheating, you'd probably tell them, wouldn't you? In most cultures, you'd say, look, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but I saw your girlfriend, or I saw your husband, or I saw your partner, you know, with another person, you know, in a compromising sort of situation. You'd probably tell them, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but here we are, you know, because you'd feel that's the right thing to do. In Japan, that's considered to be a terrible thing to do, because you'd be inflicting pain on everybody concerned. You'd be inflicting pain on the person who's being cheated on, the person who's doing the cheating, everybody involved. So you'd be considered to be a bad person for doing it. And we know this for a fact because we've seen it. We've seen it, you know, and when you talk about it with people, oh, yeah, no, you wouldn't tell them. You wouldn't tell them. That'd be terrible. Why would you tell them? Everybody's just going to feel bad. So, you know, stuff like that. See, you know, that's the stuff. And just because most Japanese people will tell you, yeah, that's right, you wouldn't want, no one's going to tell you. If they find out that your wife's cheating on you, they're probably not going to tell you. Probably. Again, generalizations, but probably not. And just because everybody agrees that that's right doesn't mean that you're going to feel better about it, does it? Right? Same for the Japanese person living in your country. Just because your friends and family and everybody else tell your partner that you're perfectly normal and that they agree with you, and that, you know, the partner should try and see it from your point of view, doesn't make it any easier for your partner to see it from your point of view. So there it is. Again, just generalizations, but there's a fair chance if you try it, that's how it's going to go. And no doubt those of you who've lived in Japan long term, been in relationships, will have heard all these stories as well. They just tell you, as soon as they find out, oh, you're a foreigner and live in Japan and you're married to a Japanese person. If they have had anyone in their life who's lived a similar sort of life, they'll tell you, oh, my friend, my neighbour, my somebody married a foreigner, and they'll tell you all about it. You know, and almost inevitably, it's a sad ending. There's very rarely it's like, and they lived happily ever after. Anyway, there it was. Hopefully that's of use to somebody, and hopefully it answered the question for that person who asked the question. More videos coming soon.